The Farmhouse is a spooky tale about two young boys who go exploring the countryside and come across an old, abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. Every summer, my mother would take me to visit our relatives who lived out in the country. My cousin and I were almost the same age, and we were always up to mischief. We spent our days out in the fields, exploring the area, making bows and arrows, sharpening knives, throwing rocks, climbing trees, and tracking wild animals. One day, we set out on a long walk across the fields, not really having any idea where we were going. Sometimes we like to get ourselves lost and then try to find our way home. After a few hours of walking, it was getting late in the afternoon when we came across a farmhouse that looked as if it was abandoned. On the property, there was a small storage shed, so we jumped over the fence and decided to find out what was inside. We found that the doors were locked. There was a small keyhole, but we couldn't see through it because it was blocked by dust and thick spiderwebs. We walked toward the house and noticed that the front door was standing open, but there was no sign of life coming from within. The yard was overgrown with grass and weeds. The only sound we could hear was an old windmill nearby, rattling in the breeze. I went to the door of the house and shouted, "Hello!" But there was no answer. It was then that the smell hit me. It was a stench of damp, mold, and decay. I stepped inside. There were clothes and papers everywhere, and some cardboard boxes. There was also an old bed, some racks of moth-eaten clothes, and a leather armchair. I took a few steps forward, and the smell seemed to get worse. A feeling of intense uneasiness washed over me, and I wanted to turn and run away. Just then, something caught my eye. At the foot of the bed, between some boxes, lay a head. It was covered in gray hair. There was an old man lying on his back, his face turned upwards and his eyes open. He was dead. I let out a horrified yell, then grabbed my cousin by the arm, and we both ran as fast as we could. As we fled across the yard, we were passing the shed outside when the locked door suddenly crashed open, and an old lady was standing there. Her hair was in disarray, and when she smiled, her lips parted, revealing a row of rotten teeth. She was carrying a bloody knife in her hand. She made an attempt to grab me as we rushed past, but I managed to dodge her and kept running. I didn't dare look back. I just ran as fast as I could. It was a few minutes later that I realized my cousin wasn't with me. I stopped in my tracks, breathing heavily, and looked around. He was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank. I started running again, desperately trying to get back to my aunt and uncle's house as quickly as possible. Eventually, I saw the lights of their house in the distance. As soon as I reached home, I ran inside and called out to my mother. My relatives gathered around me as I started babbling and begged them to go find my cousin. My uncle got into his truck and brought me with him. Eventually, we found the old farmhouse, but my cousin wasn't there. Neither were the old man or the old woman. After searching for a while, my uncle called the police. A few days later, my cousin still had not been found. The farm was searched from top to bottom, but there was no trace of him, and he remains missing to this day. It's one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in the region. I don't know what happened to my cousin that day, but I am glad it didn't happen to me. The Girl in a Red Dress is a scary story about a little girl who is locked in her room because her grandma tells her she was bad. Granny locked me in my room and she won't let me out. She says it's because I was bad. Sometimes I do bad things. Ever since my mommy went away. Granny says my mommy is in heaven. I don't know how she got there. I can still remember mommy. I remember her long black hair and her dark eyes. I remember her red lips and her white teeth. I remember her soft skin. I remember the way she smelled. Her red dress still smells like her. It's hanging in the wardrobe in her bedroom. Granny keeps Mommy's room locked. She says I'm not allowed in there, but I know where she hides a key. Sometimes when Granny falls asleep, I sneak in there and smell Mommy's red dress. I have a friend called Mary, and she lives across the street. Sometimes she comes over to my house to play. She came over today. We were playing with dolls. Granny told me, "Don't go into your mother's room." "Okay," I said. When Granny took her nap, I told Marian, Let's play dress up. I took the key from Granny's hiding place and unlocked the door to Mommy's bedroom. We went inside. It was almost too dark to see. This is where my mommy lives, I said. You don't have a mommy, Marion said. That made me angry. I opened the wardrobe and took out the red silk dress. This is my mommy's dress, I said. I held it up to show her. It stinks, Marion said. No, it doesn't, I said. It smells like flowers. It smells like dead things, she said. That made me even more angry. Who's that? Asked Marianne. She was pointing at a picture. That's my mommy, I said. Isn't she beautiful? She's ugly, Marion said. She has creepy eyes and her teeth are weird. No, she hasn't, I said. She looks like the most beautiful girl in the world. She looks like a dead thing, Marion said. That made me the angriest of all. I don't remember what happened then. I think I heard Marion screaming. I don't remember why. It was dark, and I almost couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything except Mary and screaming. I think something bad happened. Then I remember Granny shouting at me. She was crying too. She took the red dress off me. She was really rough, and she kept hitting me. I was crying too. Granny fetched a washcloth and wiped the blood off my face. She told me over and over how bad I was. Then she dragged me all the way upstairs and locked me in my room. I looked out the window and saw Granny in the backyard. She was burying something with a shovel. I must have done something really bad. The Scarecrow is a scary story about a farmer who builds the scariest and most hideous of all scarecrows to take care of his farm. There was an old farmer in Arizona who owned the best farm in the area. Everybody said his crops were the best, and people came from all over to buy their goods from him. Whenever people asked him how he was able to grow such good quality crops, the old farmer would say it was all down to his scarecrow. That old scarecrow is the one I have to thank, said the farmer. He makes sure no crows or critters or pests come near my crops. The old farmer had built the scarecrow himself, and it was a fearsome sight. He spent months working on it to make it as scary as possible. He knew how important it was to keep pests away from his crops. So he gave it enormous straw arms that stretched out about 6 feet and big long legs that made it as tall as a tree. But the scariest thing about the scarecrow was its head. The farmer carved it himself out of a huge pumpkin. He spent countless days and nights perfecting his design until it was perfect. The scarecrow's face and head was so grotesque and ugly that even he was sometimes scared to look at it. But it was very effective, scaring away every rodent and bird that ventured near. The neighboring farm was owned by 2 young men who were brothers named Josh and Harold. They were lazy and never did much work around the farm, which resulted in their crops being bad. They were jealous of the old farmer's success and were plotting against him. If they could drive him out of business, they could take over his farm and make more money. So one night, the brothers decided to sneak onto the old farmer's land. They stole his prized scarecrow and brought it back to their own house, where they stuffed it into an old closet so nobody would ever find it. The next day, the farmer woke up to find his hideous scarecrow missing and all his crops being eaten by rats and crows. He fell to his knees and cried, knowing that his farm would soon be out of business. Meanwhile, the brothers, Josh and Harold, were watching from their own property and couldn't help laughing out loud when they saw the old man's tears of grief. Hearing the laughter, the old farmer came over and asked them if they knew what happened to his scarecrow. The brothers looked him right in the eye and said they had no idea where his precious scarecrow might be. "But you know I'll go out of business and have to sell my farm if I can't find my scarecrow," said the farmer. Josh just laughed in his face, saying, "That's just your tough luck, isn't it?" "Sucks to be you," giggled Harold. The old farmer walked slowly back to his house, his head hanging down in defeat and depression. That night, as Josh and Harold had trouble sleeping, not because they felt any remorse, but because they couldn't get the image of the scarecrow's horrible, twisted face out of their minds. They decided they would never be able to sleep as long as that ugly pumpkin head was in their house. So they got up and dragged the scarecrow out of the closet. Harold took a baseball bat and smashed the Scarecrow's head to pieces until all that was left was little bits of pumpkin strewn around the floor. The brothers swept up the pumpkin head pieces and threw them in the trash. Then they went back to bed and were soon fast asleep, having put all thoughts of the disgusting Scarecrow face out of their heads. Sometime after midnight, Josh and Harold were awoken by the sounds of scratching and clawing at their bedroom door. "Did you forget to put the dog out?" asked Harold, sleepily. "We don't have a dog," stammered Josh. Suddenly the bedroom door burst open, and a solitary long straw arm snaked in through the opening. Then a second arm thrashed around, followed by 2 long stick legs. The 2 brothers were frozen in fear and could only look with horror as the headless Scarecrow's body rose up on its long stick legs, and its long arms reached out for them in the darkness. Harold felt a cold, sinewy straw claw close around his ankle and screamed as loud as he could. He begged his brother Josh to help him, but Josh was already running out of the bedroom. Fleeing in terror, he ran down the hallway, crashed to the front door and out onto the moonlit road. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, puffing and panting and screaming at the top of his voice. As he passed his neighbor's house, he saw the old farmer standing at his gate. In the moonlight, he could see the farmer just staring at him with a strange smile on his face. Josh kept running, his bare feet slapping against the rough gravel road. He glanced back over his shoulder and saw something that scared him to his very soul. He saw the Scarecrow running along the road close behind him. It was gaining on him, coming closer and closer, and that wasn't all he saw. He noticed that the Scarecrow had a brand new head, and it looked a lot like Harold.